How do you detoxify? That's some of the questions that you've all been asking, right? How do you detoxify? How do you get rid of all this crud that our bodies are being exposed to? And I want to take this a step further, because some of you in the prior mold videos that I posted were asking, well, what do we do if we can't get out of the mold? Like, what if we're stuck? Or what do we do to help detoxify? And really, that's the part that I want to talk to you about, because there is actually stuff you can do. And to have a conversation about detoxification in general, that's like a 4-hour conversation. So there'll be more videos coming on that. But really, I want to focus on mold, because this has been something I've been bringing up, and I think it's actually a way bigger problem than we realize. So let's get into it, right? So first thing is, it all depends in terms of detoxifying mold and how to help clear it out. It really depends on how much of a toxic burden there is. And, you would think of it as you've got a boat, right? In your boat, there's a hole and there's water coming in, and those are the toxins. And if the hole is really small, you can get rid of the water and keep the boat afloat and everything's cool. Now, there are some cases where there's one or multiple individuals falling apart, and you've got a kid who's just completely losing it, or someone who's really, really sick. And in that case, the hole is probably so big that there's so much water gushing in that you just can't get it pumped big enough to get rid of that water. And there are some cases where the environmental exposure is so bad that you really cannot detoxify in the face of it. And those are usually scenarios where, there's someone who's really sick. And we've had families where, once they found like what's going on, literally there's like half the home is covered in mold. And there's no way you can just detox out of that. But let's say that you don't have that kind of a nasty scenario, or you just want to be on the safe side. You want to just make sure that things are running optimally and you and your kids are detoxifying, and there is no obvious horrible thing, but you just want to be healthier, right? So what do we do in that scenario? How do you detoxify to get everything moving and clear this crud out of your system, right? That's what we want to know. First thing, keep the intestines happy. And we keep the intestines happy, but by feeding it what it really likes. And what do the intestines, and especially the bacteria in the intestines, like? Fiber. Bacteria love fiber. And fiber is also what helps, right, stuff come out. So if your kid is the type that does not love fiber, that's when prebiotics become helpful. That's where, as much as I hate to say it, sometimes you even do fiber gummies, because whatever you need to do, you need to feed the fiber in and you need to get the bowels moving. A constipated person is not detoxifying. A person whose intestinal tract is a big hot mess and there's diarrhea and stool that's falling apart and everything is a big mess, you're not detoxifying very well. There are wonderful prebiotics out there. And I won't give names because there's so many of them. If you go to websites like Pure Formulas and type in prebiotics, there are lots of ones. So prebiotics could be a tool if you need it. I would ultimately love, whether you're using smoothies or you're even baking vegetables into foods. There are multiple great cookbooks where they actually teach you how to make brownies that are chock full of vegetables, or you use soups, whatever it is. Ultimately, the foods are best. And the more variety of vegetables, the better and diverse the fiber is that will ultimately feed the bacteria. Probiotics are helpful for sure, and you can use probiotics to keep the intestinal tract happy as well. Zinc is a really, really big, important nutrient, and especially in the face of mold toxicity, in the face of mold exposure. I've got to tell you, every single kid that I see who has mold exposure has a zinc deficiency. Every single thing. And it's actually become one of my telltale signs. If I look on the blood work and the zinc is deficient and there's one or two other things, and usually vitamin D is really low too, chances are one of the things that's happening is that there's mold. And why that is because the mold causes so much irritation in the intestines that you actually get malabsorption. So you get iron deficiency, you get zinc deficiency, you can get vitamin D deficiency, along with a host of other things. So zinc is important. Fish oils are helpful. So if you're not eating fish or your family's not eating fish twice a week, generally speaking, doing some supplementation with fish oils, that they can actually help calm down the inflammation in the intestines, which is nice. On top of that, I would say looking for foods that also help with detoxification and inflammation. And the top of that list, turmeric is probably the number one food you can use, or spice I should say, that can help calm down inflammation. And you can put it in, cooked chicken. You can put it on fish. You can put it in everywhere. And, if you get into the rhythm of just a little sprinkle here, a little dash there, or whatever, you can actually get a lot of wonderful things to happen. So keeping the intestinal tract happy is the foundational piece to making sure detoxification is working. Now, what about beyond that? Because I'm sure all of you have heard that. You're like, okay, that's old news, Dr. Kikal. Come on, tell me something new, right? So that's when we get into the specific pathways that the mold toxins are actually cleared through. And without doing a whole biochemistry lesson, because I'm sure I bore you to death with that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty simple details, which is ultimately there's one liver pathway. It's called glucuronidation. What is glucuronidation? It's basically a liver enzyme pathway that the mold toxins, the vast majority of them, I'd say 85% of them, are ultimately cleared out. And then when you look at glucuronidation in terms of what are the key compounds, key chemicals, if you want to say cofactors, that help drive effective glucuronidation are, drumroll, curcumin. So again, turmeric is actually really, really, really important for glucuronidation. And I've had some patients where when I started them on turmeric or curcumin, they actually had this weird adverse reaction. And part of it was that they were so toxic that all of a sudden we started gearing these pathways up and they actually didn't do well. So what else? We've got broccoli extract. So sulforaphane is actually a fantastic compound to help support glucuronidation. And you can find, if you type in Brocomax as one product, so Broccomax, it's by Jar Formulas. I have no affiliation with them. Or if you just type in sulforaphane, Sulforphane, sulforaphane, you can actually find wonderful products. And typically speaking, these products are not nasty. So most of the families that I've put on these different products with sulforaphane, the kids don't mind the taste of it at all. It mixes in things pretty easily. Resveratrol is actually something that's super, super, super helpful. Resveratrol also supports glucuronidation. And then the last thing is actually green tea extract. So the EGC, which is basically from green tea, that also helps support glucuronidation. And you can find decaffeinated green tea extract that has these compounds to support. But, if you want to just keep it really simple, if your kid is eating a ton of broccoli, which fortunately most kids like to eat, and you're dumping a bunch of turmeric in the food, like you're actually covering the bases pretty well if there is no actual illness, right? So if we're just talking like, hey, I just want to keep my kids healthy, what do I do? That's a fantastic way to do this. The other thing you want to do, even though glutathione is not directly involved in the processing of toxins, because when there is a toxic load, and I've seen this on a bunch of patients, the liver itself actually gets inflamed. And part of why that happens is the inflammation that's there causes oxidative stress, causes liver enzymes to become elevated. And having some additional glutathione is actually sometimes not a bad idea. Now, in the face of acute toxicity, so in the face of someone who is actually living in a nasty, nasty, heavy mold-infested environment, you dump a whole bunch of glutathione, you actually make that person sick because they can't handle that kind of detoxification push. So what you can do to support glutathione production indirectly is actually use garlic and onion as sulfur bases, which ultimately, these thiols ultimately dump sulfur in, which ultimately gets converted to glutathione, which is actually another way. One other thing to do is to consider just a daily multivitamin. So if your kid is eating a fantastic diet, generally speaking, the bases are covered. Every now and then you get weird deficiencies in selenium, or some of the B vitamins are less than optimal. You may not be getting as much folate as what the body needs. And everyone gets so excited about MTHFR, and they're like, MTHFR, MTHFR, and yeah, it's important. But if you take a multivitamin that has a few micrograms of folate pretty much every day or most days, you've already covered your bases for MTHFR or any of these weird mutations. So if you want optimal detoxification just to cover your bases, you can give your kid a multivitamin a few times a week just to bump up those vitamin levels and have that covered. By doing these simple things, and you don't need to get crazy complicated into this, by doing these simple things, you actually can start the detoxification or support detoxification to make sure that everything is moving along. And again, I listed some of the supplements there. So if you want to get fancy, you can do that. You can kind of take your pick. And hopefully this helps. I hope this helps. And for those of you who are worried about mold exposure, the final piece of this conversation is using binders. So for this, I would definitely talk to someone that knows what they're doing. You don't want to indiscriminately use these, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can actually cause nutrient deficiencies. Most mold toxins are bound by two things: charcoal and bentonite clay. By using charcoal and bentonite clay, and what I generally do for my patients is I basically have them take this in the evening time, so basically right before bed, so that it's not binding nutrients, it's not binding other things. And the charcoal and clay will actually bind the mold toxins and pull them out. I would not recommend this if you're just doing it as just, hey, I just want to keep myself or my kid healthy. I wouldn't do it indiscriminately, because you can, over time, unintentionally cause nutrient deficiencies or other things. But let's say like, oh my God, we do have some mold, we can't do anything about it. We're in this environment and we just want to try to minimize the damage that'll come. That's when I would say doing everything that we talked about and adding some charcoal and clay to keep the toxins moving out is not a bad idea. But for especially that piece, I would find someone that is a moldlet or a doctor, and someone that actually knows something. And a lot of functional medicine doctors through ifm.org, and these doctors are everywhere. There's wonderful nutritionists that understand detox. You can use them as allies to help guide you in terms of dosing of some of these products for you and your kids, so that you are doing this under a supervised kind of setting. Because when it comes to charcoal and clay, using it for brief periods, not a big deal. If you're planning to take this for months and months and months and months, you want someone watching over you just to make sure that we don't accidentally cause some kind of issue. So I hope this helps. I wish you all the most beautiful new year to come, and happy holidays. And we'll be talking soon. You be well. It's Dr. K.